Striven for by many and achieved by few.
This is the first of what is going to be 35 endorsement interviews in the next 3 weeks.
Gosh.
Thanks to both of you for being here and on time. I'm going to go over the parameters and see if I remember the speech. So it's not a debate. The goal here is for us to understand a little bit better what separates the two of you, how you're distinct from one another, where you would be different in governing. We may not give equal time, which means we may spend more time with one person than another, but that's mostly because we're trying to extract the answers we're seeking. You are allowed to talk to each other if you want, but we would encourage you not to treat this as a debate or expect to give rebuttals. The goal instead is to have a conversation with us so that we can better understand who it is that we should endorse in 3 weeks. So without further ado, Brian, you can go ahead and start rolling.
Okay.
And I would ask that the incumbent begin by giving us a 1-minute introduction about who you are and why you're seeking re-election.
Sure. My name is Lynn Peterson, Metro Council President. I have spent a career in the Portland Metro region, both as a transportation professional, engineer, and planner, as well as being elected formally to Lake Oswego City Council, Clackamas County Commission, and the first elected chair of Clackamas County, which has allowed me to build up a set of deep relationships and trust within not only the electeds, but a lot of communities throughout the region, and be able to understand the uniqueness of every city and every community and their needs. The position of Metro Council President being unique, of the only elected regional government in the country with a variety of different of services, has obviously expanded, and we'll be talking about that expansion of services during a crisis. And that's why I'm running, because we are not out of the crisis. We are still in crisis, whether that is the homeless crisis, coming out of the pandemic and getting the garbage picked up, or whether that is the economic crisis that we find ourselves still in. And I am dedicated to making sure that we don't slow down or start over, that we keep going and keep the momentum up so that we can actually see the region that we want to see and really deal with real people and real businesses issues, not philosophical
Great.
issues.
So I'd ask for the same from you. If you can give us a little introduction about who you are, where you're from, and why you're seeking this office.
Sure, great. Thanks for having me. Alyssa Pishka. I'm currently president of Bridge Economic Development. I live in Northeast Portland right now, but I originally am from the Midwest, Kansas City area. And while growing up in that area, I really watched sprawl live and in action, taking over farmlands, unfortunately, and leaving our downtown behind. That's what propelled me to go into urban planning, got my degree from University of Kansas. Go Jayhawks, big win, that was a great game.
Rock Chalk.
Yeah, so we moved out here, I moved out here in '96 because of Portland, the urban growth boundary, and actually because of Metro, regional government was unique to the region. And that's really foundational to some of my experience that's so critical for the role of Metro. Started my career though within development, but that allowed me to get to know the region intimately. All the cities, the personalities, the culture, the barriers and the opportunities across the region. In 2008, I pivoted. I went to Vancouver, Washington, and led economic development there, which really gave me a sense of what it takes to govern. I think we did a really good job there of collaboration and innovation in terms of how a city can work and move forward and really achieve its visions. And then most recently, I've been running my own consulting firm for the last 4 years in economic development, work with various cities in the West Coast, ranging from Bozeman to just completed the City of Portland regional economic development strategy of the 4 counties. And we completed that in November of last year. And through that process, what I observed is really what's propelling me to run is I'm seeing there's divisions between government and business, and we need to come together if we're going to solve problems. So that's why I'm running right now. I think the region has amazing potential. We're just trapped right now until we address some of these really key issues facing our region.
What kind of divisions are you talking about between government and business?
Well, I think unfortunately the failure of the transportation bond really articulates how we're not coming together to move forward as a region. That was a pretty divisive process. I think that's and what's also being articulated now is People for Portland, the recent measure that they just floated to address the homeless service bond. It's not great to be governing by ballot measures, but I think when people are not coming to the table, they're not being listened to, this is how we're reacting. And so it's a waste of money and resources. I think everyone would agree. We need to be taking care of the people on the streets that are suffering rather than battling out how to be addressing the issue.
Can you be just a little bit more specific about your differences with the incumbent?
I see my difference is intimate understanding of the business.
Yeah, but in terms of specific policy, votes she's taken, policies, priorities she has that are different than yours. I'm just trying to get a clearer sense beyond the rhetoric.
Mm-hmm. I think the different in the policy, I think it would be more in the leadership style of how we would be approaching it
Tell us her leadership style and then yours.
So I am absolutely committed to bringing everyone to the table, the suburban communities, listening to different perspectives, and that gets back to this division. We're not bringing the private sector to the table to help solve problems going forward. And I bridge both sides, both public and private, and so I have the ability to bring both of those voices together.
Are you hearing yourself? It's unspecific enough to not be helpful.
Okay.
What is it that Lynn has done? Give me the name of a business that's annoyed with Lynn and her policies. I'm surprised you're focusing on business as opposed to local governments, because the bridge has always been between Metro and local governments. Is that no longer an issue since Metro is now banking local governments? I'm just trying to sort through specifically what.
In terms of specific businesses that are frustrated?
You're running against Lynn. You've got some pretty good endorsers. You know, edify us. What's she done wrong?
What has she done?
Yeah, tell me a business that she's annoyed. Tell me a
Well, I think
policy.
if you were to look at the funding of the transportation bond, the Oregon Business and Industries, Nike, Intel, the Washington County Chamber, those would be specific businesses that are frustrated.
So the failure of the bond.
Well, if you want a specific example, that's one, right? And so from an economic development perspective, what I see as critical in this role is the ability to work with those businesses and make sure we're solving what they need to move forward, either from a land or transportation or talent perspective to move our economy forward. That's the experience I have that I'm looking to bring to this position.
Are you in support of the other bond measures that Metro has been involved in?
Yeah.
Okay, I have some questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So I think in some ways this election cycle, not just this race, but this entire cycle, is a bit of a proxy conversation about the People for Portland ballot measure. And so I'd like to have each of you tell me yes or no answer. Do you support the People for Portland ballot measure that would redirect some of Metro's, 75% of Metro's homeless services funding to shelter?
No.
Why not?
Thank you. That's what I'd love to talk about. I think we should start with the fact that significant progress has already begun in the first 9 months, and we are only 9 months into this supportive housing service measure, which is really a homeless service support measure. There's a lot of myths out there about what this does and what does it not do, and yes, it's a housing first methodology, but it also has the drug addiction, the mental health, the workforce training, and the physical health that support somebody coming off the street as well. So the counties have upfronted themselves the money to accelerate this program, and that was the whole point, is that there was an emergency. We acted as though there was an emergency, and we got this on the ballot to accelerate those services to get out to the people, because there had been a lack of support from the federal and state governments for too long. So we stepped into the middle of that crisis. We took a risk. That risk is now playing out in a good way on the street. I am always for good ideas that spur that acceleration, that show best practices. But the ballot measure that we put on originally, the supportive housing service measure, was based on best practices and a lot of research and a very broad-based coalition. This proposal, I don't know where 75% comes from.
Sure.
Where's the
But-
research? Where's the best practices?
But let me back you up for a second. You said that we're seeing good results on the street.
Yeah.
Not to like govern by anecdote, but I mean, have you looked at the street?
Did I? And you're taking my words and reversing them. I said we're seeing good progress. What that
Well,
means,
I mean,
what
I don't know what that means.
What that means is that 17,000 people between federal, state, and supportive housing service measures have been kept from going on the street. Another 1,600 people have been taken off the street, 1,600 new shelter beds on
Well-
top of the 2,200. So
I'm
we're
looking-
staffed.
Let me stop you.
Yeah.
I'm looking at your dashboard.
Good.
So of those 1,600 shelter beds, 755 are severe weather, 421 are winter.
That's
So
right.
those are temporary beds.
That's
that
right.
We didn't need the supportive services measure to open. We open those regardless. We always have winter,
These are additional on top of the 2,200 that are already funded.
but these are temporary shelter beds.
That's correct. Some of them are,
So
not all of them.
we've opened 464 year-round beds because of this measure.
And look at the difficulty that we're having citing in all three counties shelter.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that. So your agency declared the Expo Center surplus in 2018.
We have not declared it surplus.
You had a whole process. It's on your
We have a
website.
development opportunity study underway, but we did not declare it surplus. It
What
is
is
still,
development?
it is
Let's put
still
that in
under
English. What does a
use.
development opportunity study actually mean?
Yeah, it means that we're still,
But we don't want this property.
we are looking at the highest and best use of that property, but we still have to pay our bills, so there are still shows. Cirque du Soleil is coming. We need to pay off our debts for the loans that we took to upgrade this facility. So it is still under use. There are 40 contracts right now that we are,
Is the Expo Center a moneymaker for Metro?
no, which is why we're doing a development opportunity study. However, I
You
did,
have a money-losing property that in an emergency that we all agree is an emergency, you spend a year talking to Dan Ryan and cannot find a way to make that work.
so on April 14th, 18th? 14th, 18th. I'll get back to you on the exact date. We have an emergency meeting scheduled with the Merck Commission to ask for their permission because they are the ones who do the day-to-day operations. In that meeting, Dan Ryan, Commissioner Ryan will be there with me to ask. Commissioner Joanne Hardesty will be there because she has found the money to pave the parking lots that we requested from Merck. And we will talk to the Merck about how to site a safe park.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead. We got to get Elisa's answer to your question here.
Yeah, let's go ahead. I'm sorry about that.
Hi.
Please tell us where you stand, yes or no, on the People for Portland redistribution of money.
Problem. The problem is not seeing what's actually written in there. That's a caveat. So the problem is, I would say let's say I'm for the measure, but understanding I need to see what's actually written in there.
Sure, they still have to like get the language on the ballot, I understand
yeah.
that.
And again, I think what the frustration is a sole focus on housing first. We need to get to broader expansion of services. This is why I would want to look at it. I think interim housing is a solution and should be included. We need to move to and solutions, not strictly binary, housing first, permanent shelter, or interim. I don't think that's what we want to be talking about, and we need to move the conversation to broader engagement of all solutions. There's different types of shelters. The other thing that we need to really be elevating in conversation, I would bring to the table, how are we helping the individuals get access to mental health and recovery services? And then the third thing I would also mention is accountability in terms of the metrics. Looking at that dashboard, what I think would be more powerful is measuring, are less people having to live on the sidewalks? That's the ultimate outcome and metric we need to be looking at.
All right, thank you. That's a good answer. So, good morning.
Good morning. I really apologize. The reasons for this is because I'm stupid.
It happens. welcome. Can you give us a 1-minute introduction and tell us who you are, where you're from, and why you're running for this office?
Gary Dodd. I am born and raised in Portland and came back 20 years ago because I like it here. And I've been a Libertarian for 20 years and ran a few times for the Libertarian Party. I quit the Libertarian Party a few months ago, basically because the party is so inept and you're never going to get anywhere in the Libertarian Party.
Oh, that's 2020.
Yes.
You've been in here before.
Of course I have.
What did you run for before?
U.S. Senator. You should remember me, actually.
In the general?
Yes.
You were in here?
Yeah. So I am running now for Metro, and I still basically am a small L Libertarian, but I'm now in the Republican Party.
All right, why this seat?
I've been eyeing this for quite a while now, a year or two, basically because I don't see a need or a purpose for the Metro layer of government. It is completely...
I was going to say, it didn't really make sense for a Libertarian to be running for Metro unless he wanted to abolish it. So this now makes sense.
Possibly abolish it, but in my voters pamphlet statement, I kind of elaborate a little bit more on that. But basically, it's redundant. What it means is that the counties aren't doing their job, or that the state isn't doing its job in coordinating all of the counties. And when you have a redundancy like this, it creates inefficiencies, right? We got governments doing different things. They're doing the same things, and it just doesn't make it much sense. So that's basically my main thing, is to do something. So what should we do? Well, either abolish Metro or abolish 3 counties within Metro and have 1 super county, or, and this is a little bit funny, but maybe we ought to just secede Metro from Oregon and make it the 51st state. Maybe even bring in Vancouver and Clark County across the river into Metro. Call it Portlandia.
You know, there was a former governor, Vicatia, who proposed the idea of making abolishing Metro and making a super county called Willamette County.
Sure. Well, if you know this in our history, I think it was in the mid 1870s, Multnomah County was part of Washington County, and it split off. Well, why don't we get back together again?
Alyssa, speaking of Vancouver, can you tell us, how long were you Economic Development Director there?
Manager. I started in 2008 till 2012, so it's about 4.5 years.
So tell us something significant that you did in that time.
So while I was there, the waterfront was underway. We had just signed the development agreement with Barry Kane with Graymore. And so one of the significant things, and I applaud the city and our department, we did not give up in the vision. Depths of the Great Recession, we didn't think development was ever going to happen. We continued to get money to build the infrastructure that was critical to make that project happen. So I personally got a $3 million grant from the Economic Development Administration to help fund the overall $40 million package. Brought in other grants to help revitalize an industrial area through a brownfield grant to attract new business there. Started small business programs to help new businesses emerge from the Great Recession. Still going today, the pilot project that we started there would be 3 of the core issues.
And Lynn, can you tell us how much of the $475 million Parks Bond Metro has put to work so far?
We have purchased several properties, significant ones along the Clackamas, not a ton, in order to actually live our 2 large values with the racial equity lens and the climate change lens. We've had to completely reconfigure how we do the programs. And so our staff have been working.
How so?
What land that we prioritize to purchase, and how we do that with the property owners, and how we do that with the tribes and the urban indigenous folks that live within this region,
So can you
as well as
boil that
people of
down?
color.
How does that work now compared to how it
Yeah,
before you put a lens on it?
Yeah,
What do you do differently?
Right. So prior to this, the way the last 2 bond measures worked is that we would do the typical community engagement process. Hey, just how do you think we should go about doing this? And now we're doing very deep engagement with very specific organizations like Verde, communities of color, and the tribes and urban indigenous to prioritize not just where we're doing our site selection and where we're doing our property purchase and the prioritization, but how we're managing the land and how we propose to manage that land.
Can you give us a specific example of either land you have or have not purchased, or the way you're handling land that is different now that you're viewing it through?
Yeah, so I think the biggest one is the last big thing that we did with the last bond measure that's carrying over into this, which is Chehalem Ridge that just opened. And the way we work to create a safe space for all cultures coming in, because a lot of the folks that we've been working with don't feel safe coming into a park.
So what happened?
A lot of the languages, right, for the displays and the multicultural way we do that is more welcoming, and then also the art, how different cultures are reflected as they come in and whether they feel safe. So
how much money have you put to work of the 475 million?
I can't give you an exact number because I'm not sure where we are in some of the other properties, but it is less than 100 million. It's probably more like, I don't remember what the last one was that we purchased.
So how do you think about it? So you when you asked voters for that money, you had a very specific list of projects and that were aspirational in many cases. Some were completions like Chehalem.
Mm-hmm.
So we've seen a really big inflation in real estate values since you issued that bond. So some taxpayers might say, gee, you told me you were going to buy $475 million worth of new projects. You haven't done much. The market is getting away from you. You're screwing around with a lot of public involvement, which is important, but come on, you missed the market. Was that responsible? Were you a responsible steward of that money?
I unfortunately can't control global markets and real estate inflation, but what I can say is that we are committed to getting that out as fast as we can, and our staff have been working very diligently on that. It is not us sitting on our hands, but we do want to do it right. And the last bond measure certainly didn't take a year or two to get implemented. They took over like a decade. So
we've written about Willamette Cove that Metro purchased 30 years ago.
That's right.
And it's been sitting fallow. I mean, there's been some cleanup, but...
Right, it wasn't prioritized until we made it a priority. And we passed a resolution to move it. No, it wasn't. Listen, our past bond measures...
Sorry, can I replay that? It wasn't prioritized until we made it a priority?
So past administrations made the deal with the Port of Portland to transfer the land, and then no money was ever allocated to do anything with it until this Metro Council passed a resolution to make it a priority.
So you've been in office for 3 years, right?
3 plus, yes.
You've had this $475 million for how long?
2.
Have you done anything with Willamette Cove?
Yes, we've been moving forward with the planning process.
Any shovel? Any movement of dirt?
No, because you don't actually want to touch that dirt until there's a plan.
But my point is, where's the urgency? I mean, how long do we have? How long does the public have to own this before the public gets to use it?
I will remind you, we've been in a pandemic for the last 2 years.
Oh, come on.
That hasn't slowed the purchase of real estate also. But Lynn, can I move on?
That wasn't the ask. The ask was, how do you do community engagement on Willamette Cove to get it right
No, that's
and
not
in
the
a safe
question.
place?
We couldn't care about community engagement. The question that we're asking is, why haven't you picked up a shovel and dug up the dirt?
Because it's not safe to dig up the dirt. That was the answer.
But
And we need to
come
make
on.
sure that we are doing it right.
Yeah, of course. And you've had.
It's a
and you've-
brownfield.
Yes, and you've had years of involvement with DEQ. You've known it was a brownfield for decades.
And the decision just came out. And then we passed a
Right.
resolution and we're moving forward with a plan. There was no prior, in past administrations, there was no plan to actually move this forward. And so now we're in the planning stage.
Lynn,
Okay.
can I ask about some endorsements that Alyssa has?
Yeah.
I'm just curious. You know, you're an incumbent, you've raised 5 times as much money. My guess is this is your race to lose. And yet you've got mayors of local governments who don't support you. I'm sure there are some who do.
One or
but
two, always.
The mayor of Florida, the mayor of Fairview, the mayor of Cornelius, former Metro General Counsel, and then you have Robert Liberty. You know, Alyssa's saying that the problem is that you're not working well with business. I don't think Robert Liberty's ever cared about business. He's got other concerns, and yet he's not endorsing you. I will ask Alyssa this question, but I'm just curious. Why are these people not on board your train, given that you're the presumptive winner?
Considering I have 20 plus mayors, including
I know, I'm asking about these folks.
former mayors, I can't speak on behalf of those mayors. What I can tell you is that the majority of those who have endorsed me, the Street Trust, Building Power for Communities of
Why is
Color.
Robert Liberty not supporting you?
You're going to have to ask Robert Liberty.
Well, I'd like you to speculate. I mean, the sign of a good politician is...
I do not do that on behalf. I do not do that on behalf of Robert Liberty.
Why is Robert Liberty supporting you?
Robert Liberty is supporting me because, as I mentioned at the opening remarks, leadership. Metro has been reacting. It no longer plans.
So this is stylistic in your mind?
No, I think this is a critical issue for how Metro is going to go forward in terms of how it's planning for transportation, land use, climate change. We've had significant discussions about missed opportunities, about Metro playing a lead in the region in terms of transportation projects, and engaged with land use planning to think about how we can be leaders in climate change. And then again, back to the economic development aspect that I bring, how do we bring in those businesses that are innovating in new energy technologies and look at ourselves really as a national leader for climate change? That's where Metro could go as a region. I do believe it's important to have a regional government. We're blessed with it, and it could be a real opportunity. We've had those conversations, we're in alignment, and that is why he's endorsing me. I think the other issue, and I know he said this, and the other critical issue that needs to be addressed is the stewardship of the $3.6 billion revenue bond, $3.6 billion in revenue for the bonds right now. We touched on the open space bond, there's also the affordable housing bond, and the $2.5 billion in homeless service. Metro's responsibility to the voters and proving results is critical right now. And so based on my experience with economic development, consulting, working with data, driven towards solutions, and I know you're looking at me thinking this is rhetoric, but this is true. This is what I'm passionate about. This is what Metro needs to do.
So I'm parsing through all that, and what I think I'm hearing you say is you're not sure Lynn's doing a good job seeing to it that the funds that Metro's raised are being spent appropriately.
Correct.
Okay. Is that what you meant?
Yes, we just had this long conversation.
Well, that's what he meant. I want to know if that's what you meant.
Yes, I would say that.
Can you give other examples of places where the money's not being spent fast enough or it's being spent in a foolish way?
Well, for the open space bond, it is about, based on your reporting, it's about $4 million has been invested in land out of $475 million in 2.5 years. I agree absolutely the Willamette Cove should be addressed and there should be action. I know there's an environmental issue. I'm very familiar with brownfields. I've worked with brownfield grants. There's actions we could be taken. Regarding the homeless service bond, that was approved 2 years ago. I think the issue is that the public and the region is frustrated. What is the plan? What are we doing? We talk about a few shelter beds, affordable housing. What is the root cause? How are we going to improve services? What are the outcomes? We need a clear, immediate plan on how we're going to be solving it. And then not just a plan, what are we going to do about it?
If you get elected, what happens to your company?
It will go on hold.
So
I have contract employees. I don't have any employees right now. And
and because I assume you have contracts with local governments.
I have one right now. And so I deliberately aligned my work schedule for this campaign season.
At the risk of shifting the subject from money that Metro has, which is a lot, to money that Metro does not have, I'm curious, Alyssa, what is, in your mind, the number one project that Metro should be pursuing in terms of transportation? You know, we know what Metro pursued, essentially a train to Cabela's. What would you pursue?
The I-5 bridge needs to be completed and Rose Quarter. Those are broader state by state issues, though. I would include Rose Quarter as more of a systematic looking at it systematically. I think the other thing Metro could be working on immediately is right now, the bi-state federal bill that was approved, there is a $5 billion grant for Vision Zero projects. And I do think it was great within the transportation bond, there were safety improvements along 82nd and 122nd. So I think it would be really compelling for Metro to be partnering with the city of Portland right now and going for those grant dollars and getting those safety improvements built. Also, and I know President Peterson's talked about TV Highway. I know there's not enough money there, absolutely not, for all the projects in the region, but you don't just say we're not going to do something because we don't have everything. So I think that would be another compelling and important project for Metro working with the local jurisdictions to be pursuing.
What, looking in the rearview mirror, what do you think now about the transportation measure? What would you have done differently if?
Yeah.
And will you try again if you're reelected?
Yeah, good, thank you. Looking in the rearview mirror, I like that analogy. When we did our conversation with folks after it didn't pass, and I'll remind us all that the first regional green space bond measure also did not pass, and we had to learn a lot from what went wrong there. And then the jurisdictions all said, okay, but now we're ready to go, right? And that's the question, is when are we ready to go again? What folks did like is the process, and they liked the content. And it was way more than one light rail project to where I get all my services, because I live in the suburbs. That's where I go, is Tualatin and Tigard area. It's more than just a mall. It is actually where I get a lot of my medical. It's where I get a lot of my services. So it contained a lot in there, and I think that we needed to be more clear about what was actually being invested in. But the way Metro has put together ballot measures in the past that worked successfully in the past but did not work in this case was that we worked very hard to get that vision done, and then we talked about the taxation at the end. And what I'm committed to, and I have made this very public, I am committed to having the taxation conversation up front. How do we pay for transportation? We need to go back through that, because we are stunted in our ability to do any kind of economic development in this region because we don't fund transportation the same way most states. 99% of them fund it. We are limited in our abilities, and we have very limited authority out of all the limitation at Metro. So going back and talking about what are the opportunities, the problem with going after federal money, as we all know, is that you need local match. And it is one of the most frustrating things that both Congressman Earl Blumenauer and DeFazio have found trying to represent the state in transportation, is being able to have that local match to go compete at the federal level. They would have been able to bring a lot more home if we had.
Why is it more difficult for us to provide the local match than other states?
We are missing one leg. Well, first of all, like every other state, gas tax. We have an over-reliance on the gas tax and the ability for inflation, right, to keep up with inflation. And the wonderful thing about fuel-efficient cars is that it means that we can't. Right. We aren't actually paying for the amount we're driving. It used to be, because we were the first state in the union to have a gas tax. Get out of the mud campaign. It was great. But as we move forward, the fuel tax, dependent on, if we're dependent only on a fuel tax, then we end up with a declining revenue source and yet in a larger system. So a lot of other states have moved towards, and we certainly are talking about this, is tolling for a project or congestion pricing in order to be able to afford that portion of our system, as well as sales tax. And almost every other state, transit is paid for out of a sales tax. In this state, we are reliant on an employer payroll tax, which is what we had based the transportation measure off of. And so we're going to have to talk about what other opportunities. If property tax is a no-go because people feel overtaxed there, and business taxes are a no-go because everybody feels overtaxed there, then what is the middle ground? Because it's been 40 decades since we have actually invested in our transportation system, not just in the state, but in this region.
On the other hand,
there's always an on the other hand.
Voters in the Portland metro area have proven fairly willing to reach into other people's pockets for a lot of money. I mean, you look at whether it's the home services tax or preschool for all. I mean, we have one of the highest marginal tax rates in the country because of the willingness of the voters to tax other people. The transportation measure, in my opinion, failed because it didn't actually give the voters anything they wanted. Like, isn't there a disconnect between sort of the progressive constituencies that Metro spends its time consulting with and what the majority of voters in this very large region actually want, which, by the way, is blacktop?
So a lot of what was included in the measure was to reduce congestion, reduce delay. And we had a vote in the middle of no one. Only half of the folks in this region were actually moving on our roads. There was no congestion. I think that there was a disconnect in the timing. Who knew that we would end up with that circumstance? So that certainly contributed to the issue of a disconnect of there's no congestion out there now. I don't need this right now. Therefore, I think we can wait.
I think that's an important, also the recognition, I think, to the point of seeing light rail. Do we really need light rail? We're in the middle of a pandemic. But that is why a lot of the business leaders said, let's put this off for a year, right? And that was not recognized. I think the other big concern, there was no sunset clause. So it would have been an unlimited tax even once the projects were completed. I think those were other significant concerns with the measure.
Did you vote for the measure?
No.
Why not?
For what I just said.
Sunset and yeah. Gary, I know you didn't vote for the measure.
No, I didn't vote for the measure, and I think what people are missing right now is this revolution we've had in a couple of years with the pandemic and people working from home, and that's here to stay. And so we don't have all these people commuting downtown anymore. It's freed up a lot of our freeways. We got to be putting all these transportation projects on hold until basically maybe we need them. Right now we really don't. Freeways are clear.
President Peterson, did you vote for the measure?
Of course, yes.
Just figured I'd ask.
Thank you.
If the answer was the other way around, it would have been like news tomorrow. So.
Back to the People for Portland measure real quick. So if let's say it passed and 75% of the money was rerouted to immediate shelter, would that unhouse anybody currently housed by those dollars?
We're still looking into that.
The advocates have claimed that, although they make lots of claims.
There's a high probability because of contracts. What do you do with the contracts for the provision of services that have already been signed? What do you do for the vouchers that have already been put out there, right, in the private sector? There's a lot of questions that need to get answered over the time period, but right now we're in a legal review, and so I'm waiting for that legal review in order to give you a specific.
Lynn, we've had a couple of activists come in and make the argument to us that we ought to take a look not at contributions but expenditures to see to it that candidates buy local, which is something I've never really thought about.
Okay.
So I'm looking at your expenditures, and the vast majority of your money is spent with 2 Seattle PR and consulting firms. Mm-hmm. And so I'm just wondering, what do you make of that argument they make that,
Well, my goods and materials are bought here.
I'm just looking at where you're spending most of your money, which is Catherine Bobman Consulting and NWB Consulting, both of which are in Seattle, and you're giving them a lot of your money. So, I mean, again, this has never really occurred to me, but is there not an appropriate communications and PR firm based here in Oregon?
Not that I felt comfortable with.
What do you think of their argument that ought to be not definitive, but a criteria you consider when taking a look at a candidate if they walk the walk and keep their money locally?
I think it's a really good question to ask, but I think how I have chosen to view the state right now is that we have a lack of high ethical standards in regards to campaign consultants. And
that
so
Oregon campaign consultants are without the ethical standards that you've been able to find in Seattle.
Yes.
What does that mean?
That means that I don't feel comfortable right now
You mean that there are campaigns in Oregon that want to run in a way that you're uncomfortable with?
That they run their businesses.
Gotcha. Alyssa, every government tends to have in front of it a couple of special interests that have probably more power than they should. And it's different whether it's Congress, whether it's in Oregon, the state government, and it changes, 30 years ago, Big Timber was the special interest. I'm wondering, as it relates to Metro, what's the special interest that has more power than perhaps it should, or at least more power than others?
I think what's an interesting dynamic from the special interest that needs to be considered is a lot of the nonprofits that are receiving funding directly from Metro and say the city and others are also now endorsing candidates. I think that's something that needs to be considered in terms of special interests and power.
So who are a couple of organizations that are receiving money from Metro and have endorsed?
My guess is if I look at Lynn Peterson's endorsements and I read them to you, you'll be able to identify some of them.
But let's not.
Yeah, but I think that's something we need to be thinking about in terms of appropriateness, in terms of special interest. And of course, you also have.
So who are two?
I would. Apano is receiving funds.
They've endorsed Lynn.
Mm-hmm.
Who else?
And Coalition for Communities of Color in the PAC.
So do you want to respond to that?
Much of the work that those community-based organizations have done on behalf of Metro is to work directly on community engagement on a vast array of the measures that we talked about, so that we can actually not show up as a bunch of white folks creating an unsafe feeling space for those who want to come and actually give us input. On the transportation measure, we were able to provide a different way for the community to get engaged through those CBOs, so that the language that was being spoke was their language. The conversation was with people that they trusted, and we learned a lot. Your question about asphalt is actually asphalt versus safe crossings.
Well, I don't think that's true. I disagree with that.
No. But if you just go with the traffic engineer's perspective, which is what we would have done in the past, it would have just been how much more asphalt and what is the signal timing. What we learned from that type of engagement is exactly where people need the investment on the ground in order to be safe, including things like we needed streetlights. There were 5,000 new streetlights for safety included in all of those major highways, the 13 corridors that we had in there. And we also learned that the type of light that was used by those street lamps was not illuminating dark skin, making it even more unsafe.
I actually agree with all of that. No argument there. I struggle to see how that consulting led you to put a train to Bridgeport Village.
That was part of the conversations. The percentage of population of people of color in that corridor is significant and should not be overlooked. And so that was part of the outreach. And out of that outreach, we talked about the potential gentrification with any transportation investment, whether that be a boulevard treatment or whether that be a highway treatment or whether that be, in that case, light rail. It does create higher land values. And so their ask through all of that work was that we go in advance and either protect affordable housing, not just build new, protect communities so that they can remain affordable. So a lot of this is breaking new ground because we're actually talking to the people who need the service, not being a benevolent overlord.
How many people do you have, and does Metro have in its communications and outreach operation?
It's a good question. I
Take a guess.
somewhere between 12 and 15.
It used to be a lot bigger than that.
I've not counted.
Well, so I do want to ask you.
I'm not the COO.
Okay. So you pay Apano and communities of color to do outreach, and they endorse you. That looks like a quid pro quo from our perspective.
There is a lot of different stakeholders that are out there that we do work with on a daily basis, and none of it, to me, is a quid pro quo.
Well, and I assume
We
that
have an
all of
urban-
these
we have an-
organizations that you give money to are free to not endorse you.
That's right.
Have any not endorsed you?
Well, I do work on almost a daily basis with NAIOP in the upcoming.
endorse Alicia?
That's right.
Why?
Why did NAP? Because I understand development and I'm going to be able to bring both sides to the table to discuss the critical upcoming urban growth boundary expansion.
Gotcha.
But yeah.
Then can you answer the question just quickly, the question I asked Alyssa about the special, the premier special interest that maybe has too much clout in Metro?
There are so many different facets of Metro that we have really only, at this conversation, we've only really talked about one narrow band of what we do. I guess where I have worked really hard coming back out of the recession is to make sure that as we bring back the travel and tourism industry, that we're not making money for out-of-state folks on the backs of the people who work at the convention center, the expo center, the Schnitz, the Keller, because prior to that, we have folks that were there for 30 years and still making minimum wage. And it costs $26 an hour to afford a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in this region. So pushing back on industry and that kind of interest, to me, that's where I'm willing to do that, because I'm not willing to have that happen anymore.
So you think industry has got too much influence in front of Metro?
I think it had. And I think we use this opportunity to break that cycle.
Where is
Go ahead.
where is Metro at with looking at Ridwell's recycling facility?
Yeah, so Metro's role is regulation, as well as we are kind of part and parcel of the industry in a private-public partnership. And so we have to regulate whether they actually, in order to get their license, they have to actually show that they have an end product, that they have a buyer or consumer, so that the public is a public protection type of regulation. So that when they say, hey, give us your denim jeans, your old denim jeans, and we'll recycle them.
Right, it's about the end market
Yeah.
if it's getting, so where's
Yeah.
Metro at with that study?
I haven't heard recently when we're going to be coming out with a determination.
Do you have like in a year, in 2 years, in 3 months, like any sense
I think
of
it was
that
dependent
time?
on getting information from Ridwell.
Right, but there's got to be a deadline at some point for when they can submit information, I would assume.
I don't have that off the top of my head.
Do you have a Ridwell box at your house?
Absolutely not.
No.
Are you not in
Gary,
support
do
of Ridwell?
you have a Ridwell box?
No.
I would be in support of innovation that was within the law. They went outside of the law and are now coming back into
So you
this.
don't think Portland Council should have allowed them to operate?
There were several cities who chose not to allow them to operate until they...
Sorry, I want to get you into that last question. Should Portland City Council have told them no?
Every city is going to be different. It would have been nice if they had waited until they had proven that there was consumer protection.
Do you have doubts that they're sending their materials to responsible end markets?
I look forward to the fact that they hopefully do.
And if they do, if they are responsible, they're recycling things responsibly, are you in support of them? Because it seems like your gripe
Yes.
is more how they circumvented what you think are proper channels versus what they're actually doing with their
Again,
business
consumer
model.
protection, you pay a lot of money to be a Ridwell customer. I want to make sure that people are actually getting their money's worth. And the other issue with it is that because it is an add-on service and not part of a regular pickup, it means that only those with money have
So,
the opportunity.
Washington County right now, they're looking at a program that is basically a Ridwell program that would be exclusive to their franchisees that would cost more than Ridwell by $4 to $6 per month. That's an add-on, an optional add-on. How is that more equitable than what Ridwell is doing?
Well, they wouldn't have done it if Ridwell hadn't disrupted, right? And so this conversation is playing out in real time because obviously the consumer does want to do the right thing. And I really want them to be able to do the right thing. But they need to weigh in on a conversation about that with Washington County.
So again, let's just say they do send their products to the right places, and Metro determines that. Would you still be in support, or would you change your, to support Gridwell operating, or would you still say no because they've circumvented rules?
So I actually don't have authority, right? There's a staff.
No, I know, but I'm
okay.
asking what you think about those
I just want to be
things.
clear. Okay. I am support of it because it is an innovation in the industry to push beyond. And what it's going to do is create competition in the marketplace, which is what you're saying. So yes, the innovation pushes, then the marketplace responds, and we needed that.
Unless the same question.
I think this is a really good example of where we were getting to in terms of Metro reacting rather than leading in long-term issues. Having City of Portland do their own thing, Washington County do their own thing. Metro's the absolute great thing about a regional government is let's convene and look at this efficiently of how do we do this as a region.
Which is what the state is supposed to be doing.
Not efficiently at a regional level. The other
sure.
element I would
Metro's very efficient, sure, yeah.
The other element I would add is what needs to happen is bringing, again, the private sector to the table. Because if you're going to innovate with new recycling solid waste, you need an end user to be using those products. So plastic is an issue of recycling, but if you could get the end user, the businesses who want to purchase that recycled plastic, then you have a business case. So I think looking at this in terms of forward thinking, bringing everyone to the table, including business, we could use this as an opportunity to pivot as opposed to just reacting to the issue of Gridwell.
We actually have an innovation grant program that works directly with the MRFs to be able to start to get cleaner supply and reduce the cost, because there is so much wishful recycling going on that it takes a lot of money to sort that out. And so we have grants that are going out to industry. We have a private-public partnership already in order to get our recycling increased in terms of the amount. And obviously we have been working with the state directly to be able to have it statewide, not just this region, because that grows the market. And we worked very hard to get that recent legislation done, and we're looking forward to doing even more.
Yeah, let's get the state involved, right on.
Lynn, do you know how many developers there are on the Bond Oversight Committee, the Metro Bond Oversight Committee?
A couple?
Do you attend those meetings ever? I know you've got a lot going on. How many
This is the
members?
affordable housing bond measure.
Yes.
Yes.
How many members of the committee are there? This isn't a quiz, by the way, but it may feel like one.
It does.
Dozen, 15, something like that.
How many?
How many members of the committee are there?
There are 12 to 15, depending on who's there, and
Because somebody told me there are none.
none.
Yeah.
We had at least one. They might have
What,
cycled
no
off.
members?
No
No.
developers. On
Oh.
Yeah, and
There-
McNamara left.
Yeah.
So
When did he leave?
It wasn't efficient in the process.
So let's go back and talk about where we are with the affordable housing bond measure.
yeah.
That bond measure was for $652.8 million.
No.
Is this
She's
Metro's?
Gary.
I know, she's been
speaking.
talking the whole time. So
Yeah, we
she
told
don't
you,
have it
if
all.
you've been here at the beginning, you would have heard the part about no equal time. Lynn, please continue.
Thank you. The bond measure itself passed.
So I just want to clarify, is it the Metro's affordable housing bond, the
Yes.
cities, or the counties, or the states?
talking
or
about the
who-
we're talking
which
about
of
the
these
Metro.
affordable
We're talking about
housing
the
bonds are we
Metro.
talking about?
Metro.
The Metro.
Okay, thank you.
So the $652.8 million that passed in November of 2018, we had made promises that we would get at least 3,900 units out on the ground within 5 to 7 years. And with the Biden tax credit and low interest rates, we are far exceeding that goal at this point. We have put out 50% of the money to the 7 housing authorities, and we are 75% of the way to the goal. So we still have another 50% of the money to spend. There are some rising costs out there that we are aware of, but we believe that we will far exceed the 3,900 units that we had promised the voters. The other, I think the other beauty of all of this is that it blends in really well with the supportive housing service measure in order to be able to get even more housing out there to folks. So,
Are there any of the housing agencies that are moving a lot slower than the other ones?
the housing agencies, no. On the supportive housing service measure, I think it's clear Clackamas County is lagging a little bit in their startup on the supportive housing service measure, but Washington County and Multnomah County are on track.
Which is the biggest housing provider that's gotten the most money?
Well, they all have their allocation of money,
Uh-huh.
and it's all based on population. So actually, it's based on the amount of property tax within each jurisdiction. So it's not a race for any of them. They had projects as soon as they saw this, right, as a possibility. They started queuing up the projects, and we were able to get a lot of projects. So we have 450 units complete, and 2,000 of them are in planning and design, and 800 are in construction.
So are you really concerned about property taxes? Or are you concerned that there's not enough property taxes that you want to expand?
Are we
Because
about,
my property taxes are way, way up, and they ballooned significantly over the last 2 years.
This is a great opportunity to finish this off.
Sure.
Yeah.
You want
finish it
to?
off.
I just have one quick question for you. Could you just restate where you are? State for us, because the Rose Quarter project has moved around and changed so much. Could you tell us where you are on the current version of the project?
Yeah, I'm actually very pleased with where we're at. We worked very hard, and I was the only, as you know, the only elected official that stayed at the table to get us to an end product. In the end, Hybrid 3 was the option that was the closest to what we could get for the Albina Vision Trust vision, as well as for the freeway safety work that they need to do with that auxiliary lane that then reduces congestion. So it was able to meet the variety of needs, not just one or two needs. It was able to meet much more. And the commitment now that the state is making going forward is significant in that they are redoing the environmental assessment for Hybrid 3, not on the option that nobody likes.
Okay, so you're pretty good with it.
Yeah, and it means that we will also be eligible for more federal funds because of the way that it is about repairing damage done to a community through the construction of I-5 in the past. So,
And one question before Aaron has a question. We forgot to ask all of you your ages, because we need those when we write about you. Please, could you tell us how old you will be on, what date do we publish in April?
April 27th.
Yeah, how old will you be on April 27th?
It's a math problem.
53.
50.
63.
Okay, great. Yeah. All right, sorry, Aaron, go ahead.
No, it's all right. I want to ask each of you to give us a 1-minute summary to close of why it is we should endorse you. Gary, you'll start.
The reason you should endorse me is because there's a hell of a lot of people out there that are disgusted in seeing the same kinds of candidates running and winning election year after year after decade. The ones that are pro-government, that thinks government is the solution to these problems, and have seen their taxes skyrocket, and yet everything seems to be getting a lot worse. We need to put something in reverse here. We need to start reducing government, and even reducing governments, by probably getting rid of Metro. And the other thing, you know, over the decades, we've seen the communities in Portland expand and becoming one massive urban center, right? So we have a lot of redundancies in all of these municipalities around here. We need to start thinking about consolidating a lot of these municipalities. And that's maybe the best way to reduce government employees, which would reduce all of our taxes. That's what we gotta do. You guys have a job of letting people know that there are other kinds of candidates and people than this, right? And that's me. We need to have one person out there advocating for taxpayers and advocating for people who don't believe in these monstrous governments like she does.
Okay, thanks,
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I think closing remark for endorsement for the Willamette Week, I'm committed to transparency and accountability. As I said, I think the $3.6 billion revenues and bonds is critical right now, delivering on the homeless service bond. If we can't address these key issues together as a region, we're not going to move forward. And I think, and I know as president, I would deliver that, rebuild the trust so that we can move forward as a region. With various voices ranging from suburban communities, suburban mayors, broad range of interests, as well as public-private interests at the table.
This position is not an entry-level job. Those who have held it before me and those who have held it in other major metropolitan areas have former executive leadership, and so do I. I have not only held the position of much larger budgets and much more complicated issues, but I've also managed through intense emergency situations. And that's what we are in. We are in an emergency. I did not shy away from any of these emergencies. Not only did I and the council step up and step into these crises, we took a risk. And that risk was substantial, but the risk of not doing anything was more substantial. We do not have time to slow down or start over. We need to be very, very keenly aware that every step we make going forward right now needs to be made together. And that is what I have always struck to achieve. And yes, not everybody is going to like everything. But if we continue in Oregon and in this region to say we are only going to do something if it is perfect, from my perspective, and there are 1.7 million unique perspectives, we will not move forward. I am always going to seek a way to move forward. And I want to do that together with the entirety of the region.
All right.
Am I going to ask the fun question?
Yes, you are.
So every cycle, I want to explain this before we do it. We ask what we could describe as the fun question or the lighter question. Silly question is another good word. I don't know that it's that silly this time, interestingly enough, but it's humanizing. At what moment did you feel like the pandemic had lifted for you? What was your back to normalcy moment? I realize as I ask this question that in many ways the pandemic has not ended, but here we are sitting in a room together, we're not wearing masks, we're having a conversation. You know, the last endorsement cycle, we were all doing this by video and not seeing each other. What was the moment when it felt like life returned for you?
Can I start in the middle?
Sure.
I think, well, it varies, right? Having an opportunity to travel, saw the difference in areas such as Tampa. But I think really when the mask mandate lifted, I think being able to walk into a store in Portland without having to wear a mask is when it felt like it changed here.
Mm-hmm. Gary?
Oh, I agree with that, but actually I agree that it was about a year ago in July when they lifted the masks and the pandemic was resolved. But then, of course, government reintroduced things, and I think that's going to happen again. So look out, here comes government.
Was there a moment that you felt like the lights shined from the sky?
Yes, and it wasn't about the mask mandate. It was actually when I saw Paula Boulevard cleaned up. We have been removing 3+ tons of trash from the streets for the last 7-8 months now. And bi-weekly pickup of garbage with homeless encampments. And I have gone out several times with those crews, and when it became visual, it was visceral within me that we were coming out and we were going to be the Portland that we love again, and we would have pride in what we do. And I've got goosebumps.
Great.
All right, thanks
Thank
to
you
all of
very
you. I
much.
really appreciate it.
Yeah.
Hey, no problem.